Morning and welcome to our webinar on extranets in SharePoint and Office 365. Let me just get the, here we go. So we're going to start with a few introductions here. My name's Peter Carson. I'm the president of Envision IT, also a SharePoint MVP and a partner seller with Microsoft Canada. I'm going to be leading the discussions today. Also on the call though with me I've got Dinesh Sohan, who's our director of products, and Amanda DaCosta, who's in charge of sales. And they're going to be watching questions as we go through. So if you have questions on any of the topics we're talking about, feel free to post them as we're going through. They'll do their best to answer those for you, and then we'll take a few minutes at the end of the session to catch up on any that we've missed through there. So in terms of our agenda of what we're going to go through here today, we're going to start with a bit of an introduction to what an extranet is, just to level set everybody from that point of view. And we'll take you through a couple different scenarios. We'll talk about licensing both from the perspective of on-premises, whether that's SharePoint 2010, 2013, 2016, or online in Office 365. We're going to dive into our Extranet User Manager product and talk about how that can work with both on-premises SharePoint and Office 365. And then we're going to take you through a demo, not just on Office 365, I forgot to update the agenda, but also from an on-premises SharePoint point of view. We're also going to take a few minutes to take you through a few different client demos as well, just to give a sense of how clients are using our solution and what that looks like. And as I mentioned, we'll wrap up with answering any questions that we missed through the session, at the session through there. So without further ado, we'll just jump right into our first topic, which is some background on what is an extranet. I'm assuming most people are probably familiar, hence why you're on the call, but as I mentioned, I just want to level set everybody. I mean, an extranet is a website accessible to users outside of your corporate network. So the idea is that as an organization, you want to be able to share information, collaborate with your customers, your partners, your vendors, whatever the scenario may be, in a secure and easy to use way. So it can take a number of different forms. It can be part of your public website, and we'll show some examples of what that looks like with our client scenarios we're going to take you through. You could expose a portion of your corporate intranet securely, or it could be a standalone purpose-built extranet. So we'll cover all three of those scenarios and talk about what those look like. In terms of the folks that may be coming into an extranet, it could be just one of these, could be a combination of several. I mean, you may be a not-for-profit or a charitable organization where you've got members or volunteers that are coming in. You may have a customer portal or a vendor portal, suppliers. Could be board of directors from either a public or a privately held organization. Citizens from a government perspective, researchers, teachers from an educational perspective, tenants from a property management point of view, partners. So lots of different examples. You may start with one of these, and then you may broaden your extranet into other scenarios from there. So one of the first things that we do when we're having conversations with potential clients about extranets is just go through a number of questions from a consideration point of view. So we talked about who might be coming into an extranet. So we want to understand for this particular scenario that we're talking about, who is coming to the extranet? What does that look like? And does everybody see the same information? Is it just a secure portal where you want to provide resources out to a common set of people? Or is there private areas? Maybe it's a customer portal and you should only see your information as a customer. How is security being managed and organized within that portal? Is there some sort of member database that you need to interface with? Do you have, say, Dynamics CRM or Salesforce.com behind the scenes that you want to integrate this in with? And how do people actually get accounts on the extranet? Is it invitation only, where your staff or your business owners are going to invite people into the extranet? Or can people actually self-discover it as a part of your public website, and you've got a self-registration page where people can fill in their information and request accounts on your site? And if that happens, what does the approval process look like? Who approves those new registrations? Is it one set of approvers, or is there a decision point on the registration form itself that defines maybe who that approval should go to? And again, we'll take on some of those scenarios as we go through the client scenarios. And is it just the SharePoint extranet that they're going to be accessing? Are there other systems? Do you need to provide single sign-on into other line of business systems or SaaS applications? Again, we'll touch on those scenarios. So those are some of the background things that I'd like to you to think about as you're considering implementing an extranet. From a technology point of view, we are a Microsoft Gold partner. We're very focused on the Microsoft stack. So we're going to be talking about both on-premises SharePoint and Office 365 here today. We also support Azure. In fact, we host our Extranet User Manager product in Azure for certain clients. So if you don't want to run the infrastructure yourself, we can certainly do that in the cloud for you as well. So I want to take a minute now. I always like to get a quick background sense from attendees in terms of what version of SharePoint they're currently using, just to understand what potentially you'd be using from an extranet point of view. So how many of you are on Office 365 already and maybe using SharePoint Server 2013 or 2010? I haven't put 2016 on the slide yet. It's literally weeks away from full release at this point now, so I should probably add that in there. Or maybe you're still using a Foundations version or MOS 2007, WSS 3.0, older versions from that point of view. Now, from a technology point of view, we support all of these technologies with the exception of the MOS 2007 WSS 3.0. That's just a little too far back. We used to, a number of years ago, we dropped support for that. The main reason for that is that all of the other products, the 2010, 2013, even the 2016 versions of SharePoint, all share a common authentication schema. In fact, the federation model that we now use there is also common to Office 365. So we can have a single product that works across all of that. So let me close that poll out and just share that back with everybody so you can see about a third of the people on Office 365 already, so that's good to see. About 60% on 2013, 40% on Server 2010, and then a small number on Foundations. Nobody's on MOS 2007 or WSS 3.0. Wouldn't be surprised though. I mean, we still come across clients that are running 2007 and looking to upgrade, potentially all the way up into the cloud and jump all those versions in between. So let me just hide that, and I've got one more poll that I want to do here today, which is just a sense of how you use SharePoint today. Do you use it from an internal collaboration point of view? Do you publish your intranet on SharePoint? Those are kind of the two key workloads that SharePoint's best known for. Or do you already use it from an extranet point of view and you're looking to improve that experience? Or do you in fact have your public-facing website on SharePoint? Certainly as you get into the 2013 version, I'm a big fan actually of using SharePoint from a public-facing website, particularly if you're going to have an extranet component to that. You can have a single solution that binds all that together. So I'll give you a second just to finish off answering on that poll. And let me do the same thing here. I'll just close the poll and share that back out. So almost everybody's using it for an internal collaboration. That's typically how organizations start working with SharePoint. Also not surprising, the 75% using it from an intranet perspective. The penetration of SharePoint as a corporate portal or an intranet point of view is quite good. And then extranets, actually about 2/3 of you using it from an extranet's point of view as well. So hopefully we can help you learn a few things on what that looks like, and also about a third using it from a public-facing website point of view. All right, so let me come back to our deck here. Let's start the discussion around extranets from an authentication point of view, because that's really the prime thing that we're talking about here. How are these external people going to authenticate to your SharePoint, whether that's on premises or in Office 365? So we're going to go through both of those scenarios. I'm going to start from the on-premise point of view. And the first scenario we'll talk about is Windows authentication. And this is how most people typically begin with SharePoint. When you install it out of the box, that's the experience that you get. It connects to your Active Directory, and the browser will either challenge you, or more typically, if you're on a staff computer connected to Active Directory inside the network, it'll just auto-authenticate. You won't even see the authentication happen. It's just kind of magic in the background there. So that's great for staff working within the corporate network. Doesn't work as well from an outside point of view, certainly from an external user point of view. You can use Windows authentication for your extranet. Having the browser challenge prompt come up for users isn't always the most friendly experience, and there's no sort of HTML or UI that you can put around that to provide any sort of guidance or help or links to registration, forgotten password, things like that. So what a lot of clients in the past have done is implemented forms-based authentication, and there is support for this out of the box in SharePoint. If you want to do a better experience around that, typically you customize those forms, you do a bit more yourself. We've actually provided support for this in our earlier versions of products, was how we installed. So we actually installed the product right into SharePoint as an FBA solution, and then we could authenticate either to Active Directory or SQL under the hood. And the third scenario is a federated identity, and this is actually where we're focused on now. So the idea here is that SharePoint becomes a relying party to a trusted identity provider. Now the most common one people think of is Active Directory Federation Services, where ADFS acts as that identity provider. So when somebody goes to SharePoint and they're not authenticated, SharePoint redirects them to ADFS, they log in there, it creates what's called a SAML token that gets passed back to SharePoint. SharePoint trusts that token, there's a certificate exchange that happens as part of that, and that user can then go into SharePoint from there. And we effectively work the same way. So we become a trusted identity provider, much like ADFS, and that same interchange happens back and forth from there. The advantage to doing it this way is that the authentication is completely separate from SharePoint. So in the past, as an FBA solution, we had to install right into the SharePoint servers themselves. And there was a fair number of changes that we needed to do to the web applications and web configs and such to make that all hang together and work. Now we can install our Extranet User Manager product into a completely separate IIS site. May not be on the SharePoint servers at all. In fact, we recommend that is to separate it completely and have it on its own IIS box. And then that authentication leaves SharePoint, goes over to our trusted identity provider, provides the token back and back into SharePoint from there. It provides a nice single sign-on experience as well, and we'll talk more about that in a minute too. Now, if we look at Office 365, it's a little bit different. Initially, when you create your tenant, you sign up for a new subscription in Office 365, it creates an Azure Active Directory account for you. And there's a password in the cloud. So basically, every Office 365 tenant has an Azure AD tenant behind that that you can use for authentication as well as for authorization into 365. Now what a lot of clients do is they set up, used to be called DirSync, now it's called Azure AD Connect, and basically it's a application that you install on premise. It reads your Active Directory and it populates the Azure Active Directory with what we call shadow accounts. So the users always need to have an Azure AD account, but it's associated with their on-premise AD account. And Microsoft can even sync the passwords up for that. So it'll take the password hashes from on-premise, push that up into the cloud. So it won't give single sign-on, but users can sign on with the same username and the same password that they use to log on to their network computer. Again, works well from a staff point of view. It's predominantly what we see when people are implementing Exchange, Skype for Business with the rich clients. But when you get into browser applications like SharePoint, it's nice to have a federation model and a single sign-on there as well. So that's our third scenario, same as we had from an on-premises point of view, is a federated identity. To say, okay, well, we're going to have an identity server, and again, people often think of Active Directory Federation Services as the identity server for Office 365, and we completely encourage that from a staff point of view. But from a extranet user point of view, you don't want to keep those users in your corporate AD and have them sign in through your ADFS. You want an alternate method to do that. And what we can do is we can actually set up two federations, both ADFS for your staff and Extranet User Manager for your external users with your tenant in Office 365. So it provides a nice user experience for both users. And I'll take you through a flowchart that kind of shows the decision process and how that works as we go through that. So let's talk about some scenarios from an extranet point of view. We may have simply a secure publishing portal. Certainly lots of our clients do this, where they want to provide resources out. They don't want to make them publicly available. They do want them behind a login prompt, but it's basically one spot for everybody to come into. Versus more of a collaboration space where you may have project sites, customer sites, partner sites, such, and there's more discrete permissioning typically in here, where you want people to have private spaces within the extranet through there. So as you're thinking about those two scenarios, or you may have both of those as part of your required solution, then the decision is, well, do we do that from an on-premises SharePoint server point of view, or do we put it up in the cloud with Office 365? And if you like what you see from an Extranet User Manager point of view to manage those external users, also have a decision there whether you want to install that on-premise or host that up in Azure. Now typically we see that the cloud and on-premise decision for both those products fairly linked together. If you've got SharePoint installed on-premise, you're likely going to want to install the Extranet User Manager on-premise as part of that solution. If you're leveraging the cloud and Office 365, you've already made a decision that you don't really want to run the SharePoint infrastructure. You can apply that same decision and say, you know what, we're just going to go with the hosted version of Extranet User Manager and have that hosted up in Azure for us as well. So I do want to talk about the broader set of options, not just Extranet User Manager. So as you're looking at an extranet, and certainly from an Office 365 point of view, one thing you'll hear commonly referred to is what's called external sharing in Office 365. And the idea here is that you have the ability to create an unlimited number of free external users that can come into your Office 365 subscription through external sharing. There's no licensing required for that, so it's not like you need to purchase CALs for those users. The only requirement is that those users must come in either through a Microsoft account or be an Office 365 subscriber themselves. So they're going to see the Microsoft login form, and I'll show you later how we can customize that as well to provide a better experience around that. But the problem is you don't really have any control over accounts that are used to accept those invitations. So you may invite somebody on email abc@acme.corp, and they can choose whatever Microsoft account or 365 subscription they want to actually accept that. So there's a lack of governance and control around that. It becomes very difficult to manage, what are those users and what groups do they belong to, and what do they have access to. So it can become a bit of a Wild West. It's really intended as a lightweight solution for very simple type of scenarios. If you've got a broader, more formal corporate extranet, don't really encourage using that external sharing feature from that point of view. Now, you could do an on-premises SharePoint, and as I mentioned in the past, adding a forms-based authentication login form to SharePoint is certainly something that was quite common in the past. It supports SharePoint 2010 and 2013. In fact, you could still do that in SharePoint 2016, but not Office 365. As I mentioned, though, it's deeply integrated in the SharePoint installation. We help to manage that through an installation wizard on earlier versions that work this way to make it simpler to install, because there are a lot of steps to be followed to do that. But it's certainly an option. We prefer, though, to go the federation model, to say, you know what, we're going to set up federation either with on-premises or Office 365. And actually, we're seeing more and more hybrid scenarios as well, where people have both an on-premises and a cloud environment. And there's reasons why, some of their content they're not comfortable keeping in the cloud just yet. They keep that on-premises. You can actually provide a single sign-on to both of those environments to say, okay, we have extranet users that may be going to one, the other, or both of them. We want a single way for those users to authenticate. It's very light integration. There's not a lot of touch point to that. Basically, there's a PowerShell script and a certificate that you need to set up that federation, and that's the extent of the integration through there. And basically, that trusted identity provider, whether that's ADFS or our Extranet User Manager, becomes that identity provider. If we're using our Extranet User Manager, we're built on top of an open source product called ThinkTexture Identity Server, and it can use Active Directory or SQL under the hood from there. And basically the relying parties, which could be SharePoint, could be any application that understands claims authentication and SAML tokens, which is getting more and more common from that point of view, particularly in the SaaS space. You can provide that single sign-on to those systems. Okay, so let's talk about licensing. How do you license those external users that are coming in? And the story is different depending on whether we're talking on-premises or Office 365. So from an on-premises point of view, effective with the release of SharePoint 2013 is when they opened up the extranet licensing. That applies to 2016. It would even apply to you if you were running a 2010 farm, as long as you had software assurance. So you had the license rights for 2013. Basically what that means is that you don't need to purchase any CALs or any additional server license beyond the main SharePoint server license that you have there anyways for your external users. So yes, you still need CALs for your internal users, even if they're going into the extranet, but the external users don't require any CAL as part of that. Now you still need SQL Server and Windows Server's licenses to run your SharePoint farm, and you do need some caution around what defines an external user, and this can become a gray area. You might even need to get Microsoft licensing involved, depending on your scenarios. So that they can't be part of you or your affiliates. So, if you've got a consortium of companies that have a common ownership, or even are tightly related, say a corporate and franchises, those are not considered external users. But partners, customers, vendors, anybody who is truly external to your organization, arm's length out, is an external user, doesn't require a CAL from that point of view. Now, something else you might want to think about from an extranet point of view is if you're going to be doing a lot of collaboration, how do we ensure that people can collaborate on things like Word, Excel, PowerPoint documents that are going to be in our extranet? Best way to do that is through the Office Web Apps server. So this is an additional server that you install into your SharePoint farm that provides the browser-based versions of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Now they're not the full versions, but they've got all the main features there. You can view the documents, you can do simple editing through there. You can even do co-authoring on the same document at the same time. Licensing for those are actually tied back to desktop client licenses, but that only applies again for your internal users. For your external users, no client requirements, no licensing requirements both to read and edit documents. The only person you need to worry about licensing is an internal user who's going to edit documents. They need to have an Office Standard or Pro Plus license for Office 2013 or 2016. Doesn't have to be on the computer that they're using. That's the whole point of the browser-based apps, but they just have to have a license somewhere for them to cover them from that point of view. So very simple licensing, surprising for Microsoft. It's a great add-on to your SharePoint extranet. Now if we switch gears and say, okay, well what about in the cloud? We want to do things in Office 365. There's a lot of different licensing plans available there. I mean, there's the business essentials, there's the enterprise side of things, there's free licensing provided to registered charities, to Office 365 for education for both K-12 and post-secondary education. So there's a lot of different options to think about there. One caveat to be aware of, Microsoft calls their charitable licensing that they give away for free not-for-profit licensing. You need to be careful. If you're a not-for-profit organization but you're not a registered charity, that doesn't apply to you. So just be careful as you're looking at the type of organization that you are and how you fit in from that point of view. You can also get just SharePoint Online licensing as well. There's a Plan 1 and a Plan 2 license. These are all full retail Canadian pricing. You can certainly talk to your Microsoft rep to see what your pricing would be from that point of view. So who needs those licensing? What needs to happen from that point of view? Well, we've gone through the on-premises side of things. I mean, we need the server licenses for SharePoint Server, SQL Server, Windows Server. We need CALs for our internal users, nothing for our external. And if we're going to use Extranet User Manager, that we'll get into in a minute, we either need to purchase or have a subscription for that. 365, though, unfortunately, is a little bit different. So they have the concept of external users, but only if you're going through that Microsoft invitation external email sharing feature. If you're coming through our Extranet User Manager product, which we fully support for Office 365, unfortunately current state is that those users, even though they're external, still need to have a subscription. So you do need to purchase monthly subscriptions for those users. Obviously, if you're a registered charity or an education client, those subscriptions don't cost you anything. There's no issue there. If you don't fall into those buckets, that's certainly something to consider. You have to look at how many users you have and whether it makes sense to purchase subscriptions for those or to do an on-premises solution. And a little later in the session, I'll talk about another option, which is Azure Business to Business, which does allow you to bring in those external users through a slightly different path and not have to pay licensing for those. That's something that we're still working at the details of how to use EUM with that Azure B2B service. So stay tuned on future plans from that point of view. So I've talked a lot about Extranet User Manager without really explaining what it actually is. So let's dive into the product itself and understand what gap it fits in the whole picture of launching your extranet. So it's not the portal, it's not the place where you go to in SharePoint that you would have your extranet. It's really the front door of how do you invite those people in, allow them to register, manage their passwords, do all those sorts of things about authentication, and do it in a way that it's very easy to delegate that down to the business, so IT is not a gatekeeper in that, and that it's very simple for both internal and external users to come in through there. So there's sort of two sides to the application. The left-hand side, and we'll flip into a live demo shortly, is our admin web console that's accessible not only to the IT administrators, but you can delegate down different roles to the business or even external to your organization to allow those people to manage groups of users. The right-hand side is the end user side, so the login form, registrations, forgotten password, all those sorts of things. So let's take us through what some of those features look like, and then we'll go into a demo to actually take you live through that. So the first thing is a branded experience. Most of our clients, branded is very important. They want their brand coming across through that entire experience, from the initial login form, the registration, the emails that go out from an approval point of view, from a welcome email point of view, basically all end user pages, they want their brand across that. This is one of the example sites for Kinross Gold, global mining company, that we'll show you in a minute, just to give you a sense of what's possible from that point of view. A single sign-on, so the idea that users sign in once as they move between systems. So if you're managing multiple systems, maybe you have a hybrid on-premises SharePoint and Office 365, or maybe you've got your own custom applications or SaaS applications that you're using, that's a seamless experience. Users sign into the Extranet portal, and then maybe they go over to Desire to Learn to access some training materials, and they're just automatically logged in onto that side through there. And it's all done securely through SAML tokens, so this is an industry standard way of doing this. We have a feature we call the Easy Realm Home Realm Discovery, and the idea here is to make it a simplified process through to identify whether somebody's an internal or an external user, and how to direct their authentication. So what we do is we come in when they first hit the login form. Before it even becomes visible on the page, we actually check and say, is this an internal IP address? And there's a way to configure what your IP address ranges are and things like that. And if we detect that they're on the internal network, we say, okay, you must be a staff member. We're going to redirect you to either ADFS or Windows Authentication to log in automatically with your Windows credential and just take you right into the portal. So ideally that should all happen seamlessly. They wouldn't even see that ADFS login page. They would just go right into SharePoint. So that's the ideal experience for staff when they're working inside the network. Now if it's not an internal IP address, we don't know at this point whether this is an internal or an external user, we have to present the login form. And there's an email and a password field. We keep it very simple. We use the email as the username. They type in their email address, and we can also have a look up there to say, well, is this an internal email domain? Is this a staff member who happens to be, telecommuting from home or working at a client site, wants to access the extranet? They've typed in their corporate email address. If so, yeah, we want to redirect them again back over to ADFS or Windows Authentication, have them log in with their corporate credentials through there. If it's not an internal email domain, this must be an external user, then we're going to ask them for their password to go with their email username. Once they authenticate through that, they're into SharePoint from there. So again, number of steps through there, but the end user doesn't actually see that. We do all that behind the scene to make it very simple for them. Now the other thing, as we're going through the login process, we've recently added support for multi-factor authentication. What this means is in addition to having your email address and your password as the information you need to get into the extranet, we want some second factor to authenticate that you are who you say you are. We want to make sure that somebody hasn't lifted or spoofed or somehow gotten access to your password and is logging in as you. So what happens here is when they hit the login form, they go through the first factor, which is their email and their password, and we actually leverage Microsoft Azure's MFA service. So this is a multi-factor authentication service provided by Microsoft in the cloud, and basically what it does is it will either initiate a telephone call or a text message to that user based on preferences when they registered. They respond to that call or to that text message back to Azure. Azure says, yep, that passed the muster there. Now it can continue through the login process and take them on into SharePoint from there. So again, I'll show you what that looks like as we go through the login experience. Self-registration is a very important part for most of our clients, where they've got some publicly available form where people can enter their information, and the fields that capture vary from client to client. I'll show you some examples of different ones. They may integrate into back-end systems. There may be custom approval workflows that happen around that. So this tends to be a very customized piece of the implementation. And what we do is we actually have this as its own separate Visual Studio project, and we can provide the full source code for that, or we can do the customizations on a separate contract with our clients, which actually is how most of our clients engage us from that point of view. Forgotten password is obviously an important thing. You haven't been to the extranet in 3 months, 6 months, you can't remember your credentials. If you're like me, you've got a gazillion different online accounts, and it's difficult to keep them all sorted. So what's an easy way for us to deal with that? Well, enter your email address. We send you an email with a one-time time expiring token. You click on the link with that token. You can now set your new password. So we never send passwords through email. That would be bad from a plain text security point of view. And we never retrieve existing passwords. So once you've set your password, it's not visible to anybody, including administrators, and the only way you can get back in if you've forgotten that password is to choose a new password and reset it through this process. So as I mentioned, we work with 2010, 2013, and 2016. We have validated the product on the latest RTM release of SharePoint 2016. And as I mentioned, it doesn't need to be installed on the SharePoint server itself. There's basically a PowerShell script that sets up the trust between the Extranet User Manager and SharePoint. Office 365, it's a very similar script. It's doing a remote PowerShell into Office 365. Obviously that needs to be hosted outside of Office 365, so it could be on premises, or it could be up in Azure, or anywhere where you want to host that from there. And we can set up, it's called Home Realm Discovery on Office 365. Basically, where does it direct you to when you first try and log in? That doesn't need to be the Microsoft login page. We can actually have it automatically redirect to the EUM login page to, again, make that a better user experience for people coming in. The end user pages are all fully adaptive, so we've built them on top of Twitter's Bootstrap framework. So that's an open source framework for creating responsive designs, and the idea is that the pages adapt to different form factors. So whether I'm on a smartphone, a tablet, or desktop, I get a great user experience across all of those. And I'll actually show you, I'm going to share my iPhone as we're going through some of these pages to give you a sense of what that looks like. This idea of delegation, that the management of these external users doesn't mean to be done by IT. It can be delegated securely to the business, and we can have rules around how that delegation is being done and how broad the set of users those business owners can manage through there. Even to the point that you can delegate it securely to external organizations themselves to say you only have visibility and management of your users, and you can actually manage them on your behalf into our extranet. So that's a nice way to push the management actually out to the external organizations themselves. As I mentioned, it can be installed on premises or hosted up in Azure. Our only requirement is an IIS server to install this into, so it doesn't require SharePoint itself. It's simply an IIS site. When we host in Azure in our subscription service, we manage that for you. We've got a third-party NOC that provides 7/24 monitoring and remediation, so you don't need to worry about the patching, updating, making sure that that's up and running from that point of view. It is a multi-tenant environment. It's also a multi-server environment, so we have high availability from that point of view as well. The product's fully multilingual from an end user point of view, so all of the the login forms, registration forms, all of that is easily managed through resource files, so you can actually update the text yourself, do the translations yourself into that. We primarily support English and French. We've had clients translate into a number of different languages. In fact, Kinross I think is running in about half a dozen different languages, and certainly there's support there for that. So pricing on the Extranet User Manager product itself. There's two flavors, whether it's on-premise or hosted, and there's two editions, whether it's a standard or an enterprise edition. Now the difference between standard and enterprise is simply how many applications we're going to be supporting. And when we say applications, something like a SharePoint farm is considered one application. So if you've got multiple web apps or site collections and sites on there, that's all still considered one application. But if you were running hybrid, where you had on-premises SharePoint and Office 365, that would be considered two applications. That would be an enterprise license there. Or if you had third-party SaaS applications or custom applications, again, that would be enterprise. Now there is also a 20% annual software assurance on the on-premise perpetual licenses. That provides you full upgrade rights to all the latest released versions. It also provides you rights for your dev and test environment. So you can spin up your dev farm, your test farm, and not have to purchase an additional license for that as long as you've got current SA on your production license. On the hosted version, there's no software assurance. It's included in there because as part of that hosting, we're going to provide regular updates to the installation that's in there. And all the details are up on our website, so you can get down and dirty into the full details around there. Lots of different clients that we have working with this across a broad spectrum. So I mentioned not-for-profit and charity. We do a lot of work there, as well as government and public organizations. But on the private sector side, manufacturing, construction, mining, we've actually got a number of new ones that we haven't added onto the slide here. So we'll have to update this. Education clients, healthcare, real estate, financial. So you can see there's a pretty broad spectrum of industries that are leveraging this. And clients not only here in North America, Canada, the US, but globally around the world as well. All right, so I've been talking and going through a lot of slides. Let's actually make this real and take you through the process of what this looks like on an actual site. So I'm going to take you through a demo site. We actually had a little issue with our product demo site, so I'm going to use a slightly different one here. But I'm going to keep these links in here. We post these decks up right after the session, so if you want to pull down, get any of the links or the content in there, it'll all be available up on our Envision IT site and extranetusermanager.com site. So let me flip over to my browser here. And just close a couple of windows that I wasn't needing there. Okay, so I'm going now to this slightly different one. This is our QA version of our product release area that's got the latest version of Extranet User Manager installed in it. And I'm currently in what we call the landing admin or the web console. And I'm logged in as a configuration editor, so I'm able to see and do everything through here. I've got a broad set of configuration options in terms of setting the product up, and I've got the ability to manage users and groups through the system. So the product isn't just about managing individual users, but it's also about putting those users into groups so that you can manage the permissions against those groups effectively in SharePoint and in other applications. So if I didn't want to do a self-registration, I could simply come in through the console here and directly add a user, just bang in all their details, set their groups that they should be a member of, go ahead and save their settings, and they would get what's called a welcome email sent out to them, welcoming them to the extranet. There'd be a link in there for them to set their password, and then away they go from there. Or I can even do a bulk import. So if I've got a bulk set of users, maybe I've got 100 or 1,000 or tens of thousands of users that I want to load up into the system, I can download an Excel template, populate that with all my users, including the groups that those users belong to, import that in. It goes through a validation step. Once everything's good from that point of view, I commit that, and it actually creates all those accounts, sends out all those welcome emails, and people are all in the appropriate groups, and then away they go from there. So this is a handy feature. Quite a few of you mentioned you've got existing extranets. If you want to migrate to Extranet User Manager, depending on what your underlying provider is, you may or may not need to go through this. If we can leverage the existing provider, maybe those external users are already in an external Active Directory, we can actually layer right on top of that and not require people to set up new accounts and have new passwords. We can just use existing from there. Sometimes it's good though to start fresh and say, you know what, we're just going to import all of those existing users into the new EUM implementation, send out all the welcome emails, and we're going to have quite a number of people that we never hear from because maybe they're no longer using the extranet, maybe they don't even work for that company, and that email address is not even valid anymore. So it's a good way to vet that process as you go through there. I can also pull up groups through here, so I can add groups. Now when we say groups, we're not talking about SharePoint groups, we're actually talking about provider groups. So if we're wired on top of Active Directory, these groups would represent Active Directory groups under the hood. If it was SQL being used for the authentication provider, then it would be SQL roles under the hood through there. And the beauty of those groups that we're using here is then you can leverage them across all of your different systems. So you could use the same group in Office 365 as well as in multiple different site collections and web applications on-premise in SharePoint, all using that same group because they're not tied to a particular site collection in SharePoint like a SharePoint group is. The other thing is you can manage the membership of the groups and all the authentication right through our tool here. And that's really the idea, is that you set up your sites in SharePoint, you set up your permissions to groups, and then you hand the keys over to the business owners to say, okay, now you own this group, you can define, you can invite users in to your site, but we're not giving you rights to control the permissions in the site itself. So in addition to managing members, we can actually manage owners through here as well, to say I can add either internal or external users to be owners of these groups, and they now have the ability to manage the membership of that group. So if we come back to the main page here, if I've been set just as a group owner, that's my only rights that I've been granted in Extranet User Manager, I'm not going to see any of these configuration options. They're just not there for me. In fact, I won't even see the options to add and edit groups. I'll just see search users, add users, and import users, because that's all that I can do. We also have an intermediate role called a group editor, which still wouldn't see the configuration options, but they would have the ability to add and edit groups to be able to set up net new groups and owners from that point of view. So that's sort of a quick tour of the admin side of the web console. Let's switch gears. I'm going to open up an in private window and log in as a new user across that way. So I'll go to the site here again. And because I'm not authenticated, it's going to pop up a login page for us. And we'll talk in a minute how we can customize and brand that as well. And actually, I just want to do a quick check back here and see what my next users are. So I'm actually going to go through the whole process. So Peter Carson 4 was my last test that I did. I'm going to use Peter Carson 5 in here. Okay, so we've got our login form. And I don't currently have an account on this system, so I need to go through the registration process because I'm a brand new Extranet user. I haven't been invited in. I want to go through that approval process. So let's go ahead and create an account here. We'll call it Peter Carson 5 as the next one in sequence. The rest of the fields for the most part are optional, and as I mentioned before, we can define different fields that we want to capture through that. Now we do have our new multi-factor authentication, so as a new registrant I need to register how I want that multi-factor to work. It can either be telephone call, where it will actually do a voice prompt call to me that I respond to do my second factor authentication, but I want to actually be able to show this to you on the screen, so we're going to do a text message through there. I'm in North America, so my country code prefix is 1. And my mobile number, please don't reach out odd hours to me on that one, but we've got that published now. And I need to enter the CAPTCHA. So I'll go ahead and register. And it's now created a pending approval account. So I don't actually have an account on the system just yet because somebody needs to go through the approval on that. So I'm going to come over to my inbox here. I should be getting a couple of emails through here. Okay, so this is the first email, and it's to me as the site owner saying, hey, somebody is registered on the site with this username of pcarson5. You need to edit their record, set their status to active in order to bring them onto the system. And I also just got another email here. This is to me as the person that registered, so I'm kind of wearing two hats here, just saying thanks for requesting an account. I need to wait for approval, in which case I'll get another email with instructions to set my password through there. So I can't really do anything as an Extranet user just yet. I need to wait for that approval step to happen. So if I come back here and I say I want to edit that record, so I click on the link, it brings up the edit user page back in the landing admin console that we were looking at before, and I can see all the information that was entered on that page by the person registering. I can update that if appropriate through there. I can see the multi-factor information, and down here I can see that their status is pending approval. I'm going to move that to active. I may want to put them into a couple groups here to give them certain rights and go ahead and save their settings. And what this is doing now is actually creating the underlying account. So in this case we're using Active Directory as the underlying provider. It's actually creating that AD account. It's not the corporate AD, it should be a separate DMZ or Extranet AD that you use for this. So I just need to give that a second for the emails to come through. Actually, while we're waiting for that, let me just have a look here. So what I'm waiting for is called the welcome email. There's 4 emails in the system. We saw the pending approval and approver emails. We're about to see the welcome email, and I can actually define the full subject body branding of that email. It could be a plain text email, or in this case we're using a full HTML email. I get to define how long that token is valid for the user to set their password, and actually here's the email that just came through. So welcome Peter Carson 5 to the extranet. Your username is your email address, which is what we want, and I have a link here to set my password, and it had a 24-hour expiry on that, so it's valid until tomorrow at this time through there. If I took too long, maybe it's Friday when I saw this email and took action on it, that token's not going to be any good, but I can actually go through the forgotten password process and get a new email with a new token from there. So let's go ahead and set our password. I'm just going to copy that hyperlink because I want to put it into my incognito window. This one here. And I'll go ahead and choose a password. You can define what the complexity rules are, how long those passwords should be, is there reuse policies, things like that in the underlying provider, and then we'll expose that up through the interface. So I've set my password, but I haven't actually logged in just yet. So let's come back to the home here. I'm back at my login form. I'll enter that email address that we registered under. And actually I'm going to do one more thing just before we bring that up. Sorry, I'm just looking for my application. I'm going to share my iPhone because I want to actually take you through the experience of seeing that text message come through. Okay, so over here I have my iPhone. Let me pull that slightly out of the way, and I'll use that password that I just set. And it's saying, okay, you need to go through a second step of authentication. It's using two-factor, and you're going to receive a call or a text confirming the sign-in process. I'm going to see on my iPhone here. Actually, I can't click on that. I actually have to click on the phone. And we can see that it's provided a one-time code that I need to respond back with. So I need to key in that 757583. Hit send on that. So that text message was generated by Microsoft through Azure, and then it got that response back when I sent that back. It said, okay, the person that's registered is holding that phone. We've done that second factor of authentication. We're now in and good from that point of view. So I come back to my screen here. We have a disclaimer page that optionally can come up. It's just got lorem ipsum as a placeholder in there right now that you can accept. And we fully audit not only the disclaimer, but everything that's happening in the system. So the changes that we did, like approving that account, changing people's profile information, the actual login process is all being audited down into the SQL database under the hood that's running the Extranet User Manager product. So I accept the disclaimer, enter the site, and I'm into the site from here. Now we don't have this site wired into SharePoint, so I'm not going to show you that piece right now. But what I do want to show you, if I pull back the iPhone view here for a sec, and let me just go over to the site. Let me make sure I'm still logged in there. So you can see it's fully responsive. I actually logged in with that previous test account that I created just before this session as part of a dry run. So I can actually go through the pages. We can see we've got the the Bootstrap hamburger menu. Makes it very easy. I can go into my settings, and you can see this is fully responsive. Works well from a mobile device point of view. If I pull this across here, I can go into that same My Settings page here, and we can see it presents itself very nicely on a desktop view. In fact, if I pull this screen down and make it narrower, we'll actually see that same smartphone view here on my desktop browser as well. It's a nice experience whether you're on a mobile device, a tablet device, or a full desktop. So I've got my settings. I can go in and edit my profile information if I need to change any of my details through there. We typically lock down the email so that you can't edit the email. Clients don't generally want external users to be able to change their email username. We've also got the ability to come in and change password. So if I know my old password but I'm not comfortable with it, I want to set it to something new, I can go ahead and enter that and update that through there. I can sign out, and ultimately typically what we do is provide in this landing page the ability to discover what sites this user has access to. So normally this would show a tree view of the sites that that user is now authenticated for, and in fact if they only had one site there, it would actually auto redirect them to that site. So it makes it very easy for them to actually find the extranet site that they're looking to get to from there. So that's from an on-premises point of view. Let's actually switch things around here now and look at it from a Office 365 perspective. So we're going to go to this site here, umdemo.sharepoint.com. And one thing to remember, any Office 365 SharePoint site is always going to end in .sharepoint.com. You don't have control over that. It does make it easy to figure out if somebody's sending you to an Office 365 site or not. So let me come back to my in private window here again. I'll go ahead and type that in. And most people, what they're used to when they go to a SharePoint Online site and they're not authenticated is they expect to see a Microsoft login form come up from there. What we've done is configured the home realm discovery to say, no, we don't want that to go there. You can see it's going to the login.microsoftonline.com right now, but it's going to redirect from there and take us over to our actual EUM login form. So now it's going to login.eumdemo.com. And we see that same login form that we were seeing here in the on-premises installation because it's running the same code. It's up in a different spot. This one's actually hosted up in Azure in our case. And I can now go through that login process. I can do a registration if I want to create a new account. And what we do under the hood is when this account gets approved, we actually call the Azure AD Graph API to configure that user in Office 365 as well. Because as I mentioned when we were talking about the authentications, all users in 365 have to have an Azure AD account associated with their main authentication account. So we do that automatically as part of the approval process. I've already set up an account here. We've gone through that process once already. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in as a user through here. Go ahead and hit my sign in. And it's going to redirect back to the login.microsoftonline.com. It says, oh, that's a valid SAML token that I understand and accept. And then take you back to where you originally wanted to go, which was the eumdemo.sharepoint.com. So it flips you around through a bunch of different places, but the user doesn't typically see that. They just see the login form come up, they log in, and they're into Office 365 from there. So it's a great way to provide that experience through there. So I've got the full Office 365 experience. We've set up just a demo site in here that's got a number of links. So if we want to come into the landing admin or the site tree or change my settings, we can do all those same things that I was showing previously in the on-premises through the Office 365 as well. So I've actually left Office 365, gone back to the product in order to bring up things like the change password or the settings page. It's just taking a second to come up there. There we go. So, I can come into the change password from there, work from there. I can actually go back to the main team site there. We should actually have a link back to Office 365 on there and do all the things that I'm authorized to do through here. So if I pull down my gear, I see that I don't have a lot there because I've just been given reader access into this 365 site. I could have been given permissions to contribute or even to be the designer on the site. It's up to you how you want to manage those permissions through there. Okay, so that was a pretty quick look at the Office 365. I mean, the main point to take from that is that it's a very similar user experience whether you're going into on-premises SharePoint or Office 365. So let's actually take you through a number of different client sites and talk a bit about their specific implementations and what that looks like. So the first one I want to bring up is Public Health Ontario. So this is a local provincial government organization responsible for public health in the province of Ontario. And their audience is not only the citizens of the province, but also the healthcare professionals, in particular the public health professionals across the province. So there's a public site. This is all built in SharePoint 2010 that's available anonymously, but I can go through a registration process here to say I'd like to have access to some of the private areas on the site. Now I can self-register even just as a citizen, enter my email, put in all my information, agree to the terms of use, save my settings, and I'll immediately get a welcome email and be able to sign on to the site. It doesn't actually expose any additional new content to me. It just allows me to interact as a named user in the site, which can be useful in things like discussion forums or commenting and things like that. But if I decide, you know what, I'm actually from a municipal public health unit, maybe I work for the City of Hamilton Public Health and Social Services, fill in my information here, that's going to go through a different approval process. It's not going to auto-approve me. It's first going to go to Public Health Ontario and then ultimately to the City of Hamilton to say, does this person actually work for that organization? And if the answer is to that yes, and I get approved, I get put into different groups that does light up different functionality through there. In fact, depending on what my role is within that organization, I may have access to BI tools, to reporting tools from a lab testing and data analytics point of view. So there's a much broader, richer set of data that can potentially be available through there. So that's an example of how decisions on the registration drive that approval process and how that comes through. In fact, we see the same thing with the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. This is actually an Office 365 one. So it, let me just actually go right to the browser. It's faster that way. If I go to ocas.sharepoint.com, it's again going to want to log me in. So again, we saw the auto redirect there, so we were going to an Office 365 site. It came back to login.ocas.org. It's under their domain, but it's actually a site that we manage and host for them in our multi-tenant environment. And here's their branded login form through there. If we come into their registration, you'll see a much simpler registration. There's a lot less fields on here, but they're still asked to identify their organization. Now, I may not belong to one of the member societies. There's about 55 societies across the province, but let's say, again, I'm part of the Children's Aid Society of Hamilton. It knows where that is. It wants to know what my role is within that organization. Here we've been a little smarter and said, okay, well, we know the email domain of that Children's Aid Society. So if I type in that email with the matching domain, we know that person must work for Children's Aid Society of Hamilton. We'll just go ahead and auto approve their account, send out their welcome email, and away they go. Because the purpose for this site is predominantly to provide training resources and materials to those member societies. So if I'm one of the 8,000 staff that work for those member societies, I can come in here, self-register, auto-approve, and then be able to come in and interact with all those training materials through there. In fact, we've done single sign-on so that a lot of that training is actually provided through an online self-paced through Desire to Learn, which is a third-party SaaS training provider. So we've done the integration to D2L as well to say, okay, there's a single sign-on that they can come into the SharePoint online portal, they can click a link to go to their course, and that'll automatically sign them into D2L, and they can actually deliver and track their course through there as well. So that's an example of an enterprise solution where we've got multiple systems coming in through there. Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. We may not have time to go through all these. We're getting close to the noon hour slot there. This is a good example of a mix again of a public website and an extranet. So we're coming into the public site on SharePoint 2010. I click on the members link. I get to the login form. Again, there's a registration here. Here it's interesting because we've actually tied this into Dynamic CRM. So Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada uses Dynamic CRM basically to run their business. So everybody associated, whether you're a staff at one of the member clubs or a volunteer or a donor, alumni, that's all recorded in Microsoft Dynamics CRM. So when somebody registers through here, it's actually going to update CRM with that information. In fact, when somebody's logged in and updates their profile, it pulls it from CRM, lets them update it, and pushes it back to CRM. So we keep that in sync. We use web services to talk to CRM to make that happen. There's a number of others here. There's a government-to-government marketplace used by Oakland County down in the U.S., a Supreme Court of Victoria case management system out of Melbourne, Australia, Transamerica Life Canada, a public life insurance company that provides a portal to their advisors, basically their brokers. Kinross, we showed you quickly the login form from that. That's a supplier portal for their 7,000 suppliers around the world. CAMH is a problem gambling site for not only problem gamblers but treatment professionals and researchers as well to be able to collaborate around that. So as I mentioned, the deck will be posted. All these links are there, so you can actually dive into those sites to have a better look at what's in there from that point of view. So from a next steps point of view, if you're interested in the product, you'd like to learn more from a pricing point of view, what a full implementation would entail, I'd encourage you to reach out to Amanda. She's the lead from a sales point of view. In terms of upcoming events on a different topic altogether, I'm going to be speaking on electronic forms and alternative SharePoint app approaches next Wednesday at the same time. So this is more of a, what's possible to build from an eForms point of view in SharePoint. It's not specific to Extranets. And as I mentioned, all the links are in here. Let me just have a quick look. Amanda or Dinesh, I don't know if there's specific questions that people wanted to raise that weren't able to answer through the session itself.
So Peter, there was just one unanswered question around InfoPath forms and workflows and PowerShell scripts being placed on an on-premise SharePoint 2013. The question is, can it be implemented in Office 365 also?
So the InfoPath is a tricky one. It's to do with authentication. So InfoPath doesn't support claims-based authentication. So whether you're using ADFS or EUM and you want to use InfoPath forms in the browser, that doesn't work well from an on-premise point of view. If those users have the InfoPath client and they're using the rich client version, that works fine. From an Office 365 point of view, to be honest, I'm not sure what the current state of InfoPath is there. It's kind of been killed and resurrected several times. It's an odd product from Microsoft from that point of view. So I could certainly look into more background and detail there and provide some follow-up after the fact from that point of view. So with that, we're right at the noon hour. I want to make sure I let everybody off at the appropriate time. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Have a look at our site. We should have an email out to you, if not this afternoon, tomorrow morning, just with the follow-on that'll have the recorded session from today as well as the deck, so you can refer back to that or provide that to colleagues or associates that may be interested. And thanks very much. Bye now.